Okay, guys, welcome back from your long weekend. Hope you guys did some fun. So, we're gonna get back to social studies. Last time we talked about our good friends Stalin and Hitler. We were just
They're your friends, not mine.
oh yeah, my friends Stalin and Hitler. They were ruling their respective countries, and they're doing it with a specific technique, also known as totalitarianism. Okay, which is very hard to spell, but we spelled it correctly. Okay. So we're going to talk about the different techniques that were used, and we're going to give you some examples based out of Russia and some from Germany. And hopefully the examples will be enough to give you like a good start to go in and start researching some of the blanks that we're going to leave on this chart.
We're gonna fill some out, and then you guys have to fill out whatever we haven't filled out. So you're gonna have to make a chart like this, and then just a word about totalitarianism and what that word means. So as I explained in an earlier video, just to refresh, totalitarianism and authoritarianism, they're not different things, but authoritarianism is a larger word, and totalitarianism would sit underneath of that word. So authoritarianism is when you have some sort of powerful leadership or heavy-handed government that controls a people. Like you think about like Thomas Hobbesian theory of the Leviathan, right? But totalitarianism is different than just plain old authoritarianism, because the idea is that the government doesn't just want you to control you and tell you how to live your life and tell you what you can and can't do, but it seeks to penetrate every part of your existence, right? Both your public life and your private life. And what's interesting about totalitarianism is it's actually a fairly new ideology. You couldn't really have totalitarianism back in the kind of the feudal period, because kings and queens could never have that kind of, they couldn't have that kind of presence in the rooms and in the lives of citizens, because there was limits to technology. But now with the rise of the media and electronics and technology and the ability to move really quickly through automobiles and planes and things like that, so through the video camera, through audio recordings, things like that, the government can actually watch you and direct you and control you. So a lot of totalitarianism, a lot of these techniques involve the use of modern technology in order to either give information from a mass media perspective or to constantly be watching over people, to be in every aspect of your lives. And if you guys want to learn more about this idea, there's a fantastic book that you can read by George Orwell called 1984, and it plays on this idea of what would the world look like. It was written back in the 1950s, but what would the world look like maybe in 1984 was the prediction. We've long passed that, but where the government would control every aspect of our lives to the point that we can't even have any sort of relationship with each other without the government being there and controlling our lives. So that's kind of what we're talking about. This is what Hitler and Stalin were seeking to do within their regimes, is have this complete government control over your public and your private life.
Okay. So let's go over some of the techniques that they used. And actually, a lot of these will be very similar when we're looking at the two different countries. But the 8 types that we're going to be talking about, or the 8 techniques that they use, is censorship, propaganda, redirecting public discontent, fear and terror, indoctrination, secret police, surveillance, and removal of opposition. Okay, so we're going to start with number 1 in Germany. What's an example of censorship that we saw in Germany, in Nazi Germany?
Yeah, so censorship is obviously controlling what we can see and think and I guess not necessarily feel, but what we intake as far as media is concerned. And so what the Nazi regime did immediately is they removed all Jews and people that were unwanted from positions of power. So doctors, lawyers, professors. That way they couldn't have any sort of educational or professional influence on society, as well as Hitler began to remove art, music, and literature that came from ideologies or societies that he saw as unfit. And so this is where you'll see images of all the book burnings going on, where he convinced his people to go out and go through their libraries at home and the libraries in public and take out any books or literature or music or video that or artwork that was inconsistent with Nazi ideals. And they went on the street and they burned them. And this was like a big show, like it was a big experience. So, and then from that point, every single person in Germany was supposed to read certain things, view certain things. I think everybody got as a wedding gift from Adolf Hitler himself a signed copy of his book Mein Kampf, My Struggle, which apparently nobody ever read because it was a lunatic's book. But everybody apparently had one on their shelves. So he was a best-selling author at one point. So,
So if censorship is the prevention of unwanted information out in the public, propaganda is kind of the opposite of that. It is essentially just putting information that the dictator wants out there. So the ways in Russia where Stalin did this is he took control of arts, media, things like TV shows, movies, books, everything. He took control of it. And essentially, all of the movies' final message essentially were the values of communism. So a lot of the movies that were made during the Soviet Union era are about the working class rising above and revolting against the bourgeoisie. Okay, so this is a prevalent theme, and really this was meant to, much like how censorship was getting rid of ideas that they did not want, propaganda in Soviet Russia, it was just to get the ideals of communism and the idea that Stalin was the greatest father figure to ever exist. It was just making sure that information was out there. So propaganda came in forms of arts, film, shows, books. And as that information gets passed on, the way people talk about their government, the way the people talk about the actual ideals of communism will change, and therefore it starts this cyclical, I guess, echo chamber of the same ideas over and over. At least that was the goal.
Okay, I wasn't writing in, but I did. I put book burning here and the removal of educators from the Jewish faith. And then propaganda. You guys will be finding an example of propaganda in Nazi Germany, which is really easy to find because, like, Hitler was, well, not Hitler himself. It was his one of his right-hand men by the name of Joseph Goebbels, who was like the ultimate propagandist. Like the guy, his whole body was dripping with propaganda. He was disgusting. Okay, so redirecting public discontent is next. And so what this essentially means is when the people are unhappy with something, that's a dangerous place. You don't want the people to be unhappy, right? And so the way that you, resolve people's unhappiness or what we call their discontent is instead of taking blame on yourself as a government, you redirect it to somebody else. So you direct people's anger to something, and that way their anger is more productive. So obviously, probably one of the best examples I can give you is the Jews, like blaming the Jews for everything, right? Hitler saying that the reason why we lost World War I was because the Jews didn't come out to the front lines and fight. And the reason why we're in debt after World War I is because the Jews hoarded all the money, right? So blaming the Jews constantly was a classic example of redirecting public discontent. However, that one's like really old and overdone. I don't want to make it sound like we shouldn't care about the Jews, because we should. But I'll give you a better example, not a better example, but another example of how Hitler did this idea of redirecting public discontent. And it was blaming other countries for their plight. So I'll give you an example of this. Poland, right, gained access to huge amounts of land after World War I. And so one of the justifications for Hitler invading Poland was to take land back. And in order to get his people on board with that, he spent a lot of time and energy using his propaganda to convince all of Germany, right, that Poland was the enemy and that Poland had stolen the land that rightfully belonged to Germany. So again, you have angry people in Germany because they've lost land. They're angry about the Treaty of Versailles. Well, let's blame Poland. That way, it will give them justification to invade on September 1st, 1939. So I will put that down and go to the next one.
So the next technique that we see totalitarian regimes use is fear and terror. So there's a lot of overlapping concepts when we're talking about this. And one of the main ways that any totalitarian regime will actually kind of achieve this is through technology and surveillance, as well as propaganda and indoctrination. So you'll educate people in the ways of the ideals of what the party wants, and therefore you will teach those people to essentially tattle on anybody that is not keeping with the ideals of the party. So meaning that we had instances where family members were essentially contacting the government and telling on, their own parents, their own brothers about any illegal activities that would be going against the state. Also, we had technology that allowed people to really just watch and listen a lot of what people did. And that was also another technique for people to be able to say, at any point, if you think or do or say something that is not in keeping with the Soviet Union's ideals of communism, somebody from the NKVD can knock on your door and literally take you away. One of the things that the people most feared in Soviet Union was a knock on their door early in the morning, because it was happening enough times that people knew that between certain hours of the day, if somebody knocked on your door, that was the secret police coming to arrest someone from your house. So there was a general sense of fear and terror amongst everybody within their own homes as well as out in the public.
And they even had instances in the gulags, like in the kind of the concentration camps of their own people. It wasn't like Hitler was putting Jews in the concentration camps. Stalin was putting his own people in the concentration camps. But there was instances where the guards of these concentration camps would kill a number of people every day, not because they did anything wrong, just because they wanted to keep this idea of fear into people's lives, that the government and the guards have complete control over you, and regardless of who you are, you could die at any moment. So that was Stalin's use of fear and terror was pretty astronomical. And I mean, we can get into way more examples of this. There was so much fear. There was so many purging of people that people didn't even like to talk about anything on the streets other than how much they loved Stalin, because there was always a fear that Stalin could come and take your life. I think there was this one instance where this lady had removed a picture of Stalin from her wall to wash. No, it was to paint the wall underneath, because she was painting her house. Took the picture off, put it down, and then hung it back up. And one of her neighbors saw her do it, ratted her out, and she was put in the gulag for like 20 years or something like that. So pretty nasty stuff. So the next is indoctrination. We'll do Germany for this. Indoctrination simply means that you are taught, specifically the youth are taught, ideologies and ideas and values that they will carry on throughout their lives. Hitler often said that it wasn't the adults that were the future of Germany, it was the children that would lead the way. And so Hitler immediately it started in 1933, but Hitler created what was known as the Hitler's Jugend, which is sometimes we call in English the HJ, the Hitler's Youth. And so this is basically an after-school program that something like 97% of boys and girls attended after school. It was seen as more important than your regular education. And you were taught life skills, you were taught competition, you would get exercise, you were taught how to work hard, but more so, you were taught the ideologies of Nazi Germany. You were taught to hate Jews. You were filled with propaganda. You were given these beautiful uniforms that made you feel like you were part of something. You would want to move your way up the ranks. And those that made it kind of the highest in Hitler's Youth, those that excelled the greatest, could have the privilege of becoming members of Hitler's elite secret police known as the SS or the Staatsstaffel. And this was kind of an elite group who would carry out the Nazi ideals through the secret police, either the Gestapo or those that were kind of in charge of carrying out the final solution of the killing of the Jews. So that was indoctrination. Kids were taught every day to rat out their friends and their parents and their employers. And so kids lost their loyalty to their own members of their family and their own friends. and they became more loyal to the state or the government than they were to their own people. And they were taught that from infancy. If you want to watch a fantastic film about this, you can remember we watched last year, we watched the movie Swing Kids, which does a really good job at helping you understand this. There's a more modern example of this. There's a satirical film that was made this last year known as Jojo Rabbit, and it goes through kind of what it would be like to be a young boy in Nazi Germany, how much he would come to love the Führer, to love the doctrines of Nazi Germany. So that is indoctrination. I'll put Hitler's Youth.
So the next thing we have is the secret police. Now, the Soviet Union version of the secret police was known as the NKVD. And essentially they were an organized, they're just organized gangs that were just commissioned through the government, essentially. And the government of Soviet Union would have daily lists for people, for the NKVD to go and arrest that were going against the ideals of communism or the Soviet Union. And essentially these groups of men would walk around and just pull people out of their houses, and there weren't any due process. It wasn't like we have the police here in Canada that come in, arrest you, you have due process, you have your trial with a lawyer representing you. It was literally NKVD would show up at your door, they would pull you out, and they would take you away somewhere, and you would either be sent to the gulags or you would just be executed. Maybe with a show trial involved. But so these secret police were just a branch of the government, essentially, that carried out kind of the physical violence that was required in a totalitarian state.
And the leader of the NKVD was a man by the name of, what's his name? Beria. Yeah. And he was he was an absolute psycho. Like, he was a sociopath. He'd rape little girls, and he would enjoy torturing people. And so, and Stalin knew that this guy was an idiot and just disgusting and just like a filthy pig. But Stalin wanted that. He wanted this kind of idiot to be in charge of this because, number one, he would never oppose. I mean, he was the kind of the guy that would just kind of follow him behind. You can always think of like Harry Potter and his two friends, Gabby and Goyle. That was like what I think about like Barrier. He was like not really willing to do anything himself, but he was willing to just commit these disgusting atrocities. And so that's the type of people that the NKVD were being led by. Okay, surveillance is the next one for Hitler. Now, this is a time when like video camera, spy camera stuff wasn't really big. We could talk about how effective surveillance is today in places like China or North Korea. I mean, even in Canada, the United States, we see surveillance. But a lot of surveillance was actually done through the Hitler's Youth. The Hitler's Youth had the job of being on the streets on a daily basis, and they would report to their leaders of the Hitler's Youth program and kind of let the government and their leaders know kind of what was going on within society. Now, in saying that, there was a lot of surveillance from the SS in general as well. So members of the Gestapo often would dress in undercover so that they would look as though they were regular citizens. They would sometimes even get into the rings of, there was like whole rings of people that were hiding and helping Jews get out of the country. Some of these SS dressed as members of these rings that were helping serve the Jews, and then they would betray them in the end and capture, thousands of Jew helpers. And so there was a lot of kind of underground surveillance that was being done through Nazi Germany. And there was a lot of this kind of disgusting spy networks that were going on. So I'll put down here the Hitler's Youth and the SS were kind of the main groups in charge of their surveillance.
The last one is remove opposition. Now, at this point, when we're talking about a totalitarian state, like the Soviet Union or Germany, really, in terms of political parties, there really weren't a lot of oppositions like we have with the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party, or the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States. We're talking about opposition even just in ideological opposition and in unofficial senses. So in Stalin's case, he did a number of purges, essentially where he arrested someone that he found to have disagreeable ideas or maybe posed a threat to his own power. So any old members of the Bolshevik revolutions that were remaining, he essentially just picked them out, accused them of whatever old crimes that he can think of and gave them a show trial and were quickly executed. So the idea of opposition, while we are talking about how a country runs, we're not talking about necessarily official political opposition. We're talking about ideological, just even thought opposition. And essentially, Stalin was arguably, in terms of brutal and swift, destruction of opposition, arguably there hasn't been a dictator that's been able to do it as effectively and as swiftly as he's done it in the,
1937 was the worst year, yeah.
So essentially, Stalin, he himself recognized people who he believed were threats to his power and very quickly used the secret police and fear and terror, any sort of resources he had at hand, and then just got rid of them with a show trial. Typically a very public one to make sure he discredited those people that were threatening his power to the public before killing them.
One big difference between Hitler and Stalin as far as removal of opposition, Stalin was all about very quickly getting rid of anybody that he thought opposed. And it started with professors, people of intelligence. So we call them the intelligentsia, the artists and the musicians and the professors, got rid of all those. And then he purged through the military and got rid of all of the famous, generals and captains and lieutenants and all those people, got rid of them. In fact, I think he put something like 50,000 men in the gulags in 1937 that were members of the military. And then when Hitler invaded in 1940 in the Operation Barbarossa, he had to actually pull thousands of men out of prison to actually run his military because he had no officer corps left. But the big thing that he did is he removed, it was intelligentsia, then it was the military, then it was the church. Whereas Hitler did something very different, and I will give you guys this last one here. Instead of removing oppositions per se, he indoctrinated oppositions. So yeah, if someone continued to oppose him, he'd remove them. But instead of getting rid of anybody that he felt kind of could oppose him, he would get their trust. And often the way he did that is he would rub shoulders with people that were very intelligent, lawyers and doctors and people in the high ranks of the military. And then he would use them and he would indoctrinate them to the point that they had the rhetoric or the ability to speak and orate that they could get people behind them. So Hitler was all about embracing everybody within the state, all of the Germans to kind of unite together and to kind of flatter his opposition into following along with him. So Hitler did a lot less of the killing off of his opposition. Yes, he did that to some extent. You guys have learned about the night of the long knife. Yeah, the night of the long knife, where he killed members of the SA. But generally speaking, he wined and dined his opposition until they were on his side. And he wanted to surround himself by people that were very intelligent, people that were very good at speaking, in order to get the German people to get behind him. So that's kind of a big difference between that. So I'm going to put here that he wined and dined the intelligent people. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. So really the only thing I'll probably make up a chart for you guys here and then assign it onto Google Documents. So all you'll really need to do for this assignment is the alternating blank spots. Will actually get you to research, because there's so much information out there about specifically the Soviet Union and Germany's uses of these techniques in their totalitarian state that you should be able to just spend maybe half an hour or so after watching this video to just kind of fill in those blanks. Okay. Other than that.
Yeah, I think that's it. I hope you guys enjoy this. I think that it's really important to think about these techniques and think, are governments today still using this? And I think one of the things that's important to study history is we don't want history to repeat itself. That's something that's often quoted. And I think that when we think about these techniques, it's important that we recognize whether these things are happening in our own lives and to hold government accountable. So for example, if a government wants to increase surveillance, like in Canada with the use of Bill C-51, that should be something that's concerning to us, because the invasion of that sort of privacy moves our government more towards totalitarianism. if we, if we see these sorts of things happening. So those are, I guess, some things to consider, and that's why we're learning about this, is so that we never have to go through a situation where we live under a totalitarian regime again. I know that wouldn't be a very pleasurable experience. Yeah, unless of course you're the dictator, it might be.
Even then, I think it's still pretty
probably
miserable.
Probably feel like a pretty terrible person.
Yeah.
So pretty good.
Anyway.
Okay.